The whispers followed her like a cold shadow. Florence Everhart arrived in Copper Creek in the summer of 1876 with nothing but a small trunk of belongings and a reputation that traveled faster than the stagecoach that brought her. The townsfolk eyed her warily as she descended onto the dusty Main Street, the hem of her simple blue dress gathering the red dirt of the Arizona Territory. "There she is," a woman hissed to her companion, "the widow who buried 3 husbands before her 25th birthday." Florence kept her chin high despite the murmurs. 3 years of enduring such talk had hardened her resolve, though not her heart. She was 26 now, and determined to start anew in this frontier town nestled between copper mines and cattle country. The sun beat down mercilessly as Florence made her way toward the town's only boarding house. A tall man exited the general store across the street, pausing when he noticed her. Unlike the others who quickly averted their gaze when she looked their way, he studied her openly. His gaze wasn't unkind, merely curious. "Miss, can I help you with that trunk?" he called, crossing the street with long, purposeful strides. Florence hesitated. Kindness from strangers had become something to be suspicious of. "I can manage, thank you." "I don't doubt it," he said with a small smile forming beneath his mustache. "But why should you have to when there's a willing pair of hands nearby?" He tipped his hat. "Owen Hayes, madam. I run the Silver Spur Ranch just outside of town." Florence recognized the name immediately. The Silver Spur was the largest cattle operation in the county. Owen Hayes was exactly the sort of man she should avoid, prominent, respected, with something to lose if association with her turned sour. "Florence Everhart," she replied cautiously, not extending her hand. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Hayes, but I wouldn't want to burden you." A flicker of recognition crossed his face at her name, but the expected recoil never came. Instead, he reached for her trunk. "No burden at all, Miss Everhart. The boarding house is just up the street. Mrs. Wilson runs a tight place, but she's fair." Florence watched in mild surprise as he hoisted her trunk with ease. He stood over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders that tapered to a trim waist. His dark blonde hair was neatly trimmed beneath his hat, and his eyes were a striking shade of blue that reminded her of summer skies back in Missouri. "You're new to Copper Creek," he said as they walked. It wasn't a question. "Yes, I'm hoping to open a millinery shop," she replied. "I've been told there isn't one for 50 miles. You heard right. The ladies around here would welcome some fine hats. Been ordering from catalogs or making do with what they can fashion themselves." Florence nodded, feeling some of her tension ease. At least he was talking about her business plans rather than her past. As they approached the boarding house, she became aware of stares from the boardwalk. A woman in a fine dress pulled her young daughter closer as they passed. Owen noticed too. His jaw tightened slightly, but he said nothing until they reached the porch of the 2-story clapboard building. "Don't mind them, Miss Everhart. Folks out here can be wary of newcomers, but they'll come around once they know you." Florence gave him a small, sad smile. "I'm afraid they already think they know me, Mr. Hayes." Mrs. Wilson emerged from the boarding house door, her plump face arranged in a polite mask that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Mr. Hayes," she acknowledged with a nod, then turned her attention to Florence. "You must be Miss Everhart." "I received your letter requesting accommodations." "Yes, madam. Thank you for accepting my reservation." Mrs. Wilson's lips pursed slightly. "I run a respectable establishment, Miss Everhart. I expect my boarders to do the same." Owen set the trunk down on the porch. "Mrs. Wilson, Miss Everhart mentioned she's planning to open a millinery shop. I think that's just what Copper Creek needs, don't you?" The older woman's expression softened marginally. "Well, I suppose it would save me a trip to Tucson for a decent hat." She opened the door wider. "Come along then, I'll show you to your room." Florence thanked Owen with genuine gratitude. He tipped his hat again. "Welcome to Copper Creek, Miss Everhart. I hope you find what you're looking for here." As Florence followed Mrs. Wilson into the house, she couldn't help but glance back at the cowboy. He stood watching her for a moment before turning away, unaware that he had just set in motion a chain of events that would challenge everything both of them believed about fate and fortune. Florence's room at the boarding house was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a chest of drawers. A single window looked out onto the back garden where Mrs. Wilson grew vegetables and herbs. After unpacking her meager belongings, Florence sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out a small leather-bound journal from her reticule. She wrote the date at the top of a fresh page and penned a single line. Arrived in Copper Creek. The whispers have already begun. Over the next week, Florence secured a small storefront on Main Street. The previous tenant, a cobbler, had moved to California, leaving behind shelves that would serve her purpose well. She cleaned the space thoroughly, ordered supplies from catalogs, and set up a workstation where she could create her designs. The building's owner, Mr. Peterson, had been reluctant to rent to her until she paid 3 months in advance. Just a business precaution, he'd said, though they both knew it was because of her reputation. Florence was arranging fabric swatches on her counter when the bell above the door jingled. She looked up to see a young woman, perhaps 19 or 20, standing hesitantly in the doorway. "Hello," Florence called. "Please come in. I'm not officially open yet, but you're welcome to look around." The girl stepped inside, twisting her hands nervously. "Are you Miss Everhart?" "I am, and you are?" "Daisy Miller. I work at the hotel restaurant." She glanced around the shop. "I heard you might need help. I can sew pretty well, and I learn quick." Florence studied the girl's earnest face. "Why would you want to work for me, Miss Miller? I'm sure you've heard what they say." Daisy lifted her chin. "My ma taught me not to believe everything I hear. Besides, Mrs. Caldwell at the hotel says if you've buried 3 husbands, you must have a special talent." She immediately blushed. "I didn't mean that the way it sounded." Florence couldn't help but laugh. It felt strange, that burst of genuine amusement. "Well, at least Mrs. Caldwell has a sense of humor. Do you have any examples of your work?" Daisy nodded eagerly, pulling a folded handkerchief from her pocket. It was embroidered with delicate wildflowers. "I did this myself, and I've made dresses too." The work was neat and showed promise. Florence needed help, and more importantly, she needed an ally in this town. "I can pay 50 cents a day to start. If things go well, we can discuss more." Daisy's face lit up. "Really? When can I start?" "Tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock sharp." After Daisy left, Florence continued working until dusk. As she locked up the shop, she noticed Owen Hayes across the street, speaking with the town's sheriff. He saw her and tipped his hat. Florence acknowledged him with a nod before turning toward the boarding house. She hadn't gone more than a few steps when she heard footsteps behind her. "Miss Everhart," Owen called. "May I walk with you?" Florence paused, uncertain. "Mr. Hayes, you should know that being seen with me might not be good for your reputation." He fell into step beside her. "I've never been one to let others decide who I can talk to." His voice was steady, his gaze direct. "How are you settling in?" "As well as can be expected. I've rented the old cobbler's shop and hired an assistant, Daisy Miller." When Florence looked surprised, he smiled. "Small town. News travels fast." "Yes, especially bad news," she murmured. They walked in silence for a moment before Owen spoke again. "I'm having a small gathering at my ranch this Saturday. Nothing fancy, just a barbecue and some music. I'd like you to come." Florence stopped walking. "Mr. Hayes, I appreciate the invitation, but I don't think that would be wise. Because of what people say about you." His blue eyes held her steadily. "I don't put much stock in gossip, Miss Everhart." "It's not just gossip," she said quietly. "I was married 3 times. All 3 husbands died within a year of our wedding day." Instead of backing away, Owen stepped closer. "Were you holding the gun, the knife, or the poison?" "Of course not," she exclaimed. "Then you're not responsible for their deaths." His voice softened. "Look, I'm not asking for your hand in marriage. Just come to a social gathering and meet some decent folks who might become your customers." Florence hesitated. She'd kept to herself for so long, determined to never again risk bringing misfortune to someone else. But she also knew that, for her business to succeed, she needed to integrate into the community. "Very well, Mr. Hayes, I'll attend your gathering." His smile was warm and genuine. "Excellent. I'll send a buggy for you at 4 o'clock. As they reached the boarding house, Florence felt Mrs. Wilson's watchful eyes from the front window. "Thank you for walking me home, Mr. Hayes, but I think it's best if you don't make a habit of it." Owen glanced at the window, then back at Florence. "Has Mrs. Wilson been unkind to you?" "No more than I expected. She's protecting her business just as I must protect mine. By isolating yourself, His tone was gentle but challenging. "That's no way to live, Miss Everhart." Before she could respond, he tipped his hat and walked away, leaving Florence with the unsettling feeling that Owen Hayes saw far more than she wanted him to. Saturday arrived with clear skies and a gentle breeze, perfect weather for an outdoor gathering. Florence spent the morning fretting over what to wear, finally settling on a sage green dress with minimal embellishments. She pulled her copper-colored hair into a simple chignon, allowing a few tendrils to frame her face. When she came downstairs, Mrs. Wilson gave her an appraising look. "Going somewhere special, Miss Everhart. Mr. Hayes has invited me to a gathering at his ranch," Florence replied, bracing for disapproval. To her surprise, Mrs. Wilson nodded. "Owen Hayes is a good man, built that ranch from nothing after the war. His judgment is well respected in these parts." Florence detected a subtle message in the landlady's words. If Owen Hayes deemed her acceptable company, perhaps others might too. At precisely 4 o'clock, a handsome buggy pulled up outside. The driver wasn't Owen, but a ranch hand who introduced himself as Charlie. The drive to the Silver Spur took about 30 minutes, following a well-maintained road that wound through mesquite and palo verde trees. As they crested a hill, Florence gasped at the view. The ranch spread across a verdant valley, with a large 2-story house commanding the center. A creek, presumably the Silver Spur for which the ranch was named, glinted in the afternoon sun as it curved through the property. Outbuildings, corrals, and a bunkhouse formed a practical but attractive arrangement around the main house. "It's beautiful," Florence murmured. Charlie grinned. "Best spread in the county, madam. Boss has worked hard to make it so." As they approached, Florence saw that several buggies and horses were already there. Her stomach tightened with anxiety. She hadn't been in a social setting since her third husband's funeral. Owen was waiting at the front of the house. He wore a clean white shirt, dark vest, and well-fitting trousers, dressier than his everyday ranch wear but still practical. His face brightened when he saw her. "Miss Everhart, I'm glad you came." He helped her down from the buggy, his hand warm around hers. "You look lovely." "Thank you," she said, feeling suddenly shy. "Your ranch is impressive," pride shone in his eyes. "It's been a labor of love. Come, let me introduce you to some people." To Florence's relief, Owen stayed beside her as he guided her through introductions. Some people were clearly curious about her, while others seemed wary, but Owen's easy manner helped smooth over awkward moments. The gathering included about 30 people, ranch hands and their families, neighboring ranchers, and townspeople including the doctor, the blacksmith, and the school teacher. Florence was surprised to see Daisy serving refreshments. "I work here on weekends," Daisy explained when she brought Florence a glass of lemonade. "Mr. Hayes is a fair employer." As the evening progressed, Florence found herself enjoying the simple pleasures of conversation and company. A few of the women expressed interest in visiting her shop once it opened. After dinner, someone brought out a fiddle, and impromptu dancing began on the packed earth of the courtyard. Owen approached as Florence watched the dancers. "Would you honor me with a dance, Miss Everhart?" She hesitated. "It's been a long time since I danced." "Like riding a horse," he said with a smile. "You never really forget." The music shifted to a slower waltz, and Owen led her into the dance with confident steps. His hand at her waist was respectful but steady, and he guided her with such ease that Florence soon relaxed into the rhythm. "See, you dance beautifully," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Florence felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "You're a generous partner, Mr. Hayes." "Owen," he corrected. "We're not in town now, Florence." The use of her given name sent an unexpected thrill through her. "Owen," she repeated softly. They danced in comfortable silence for a moment before he spoke again. "May I ask about your husbands, not to pry, but to understand?" Florence tensed slightly but didn't pull away. If she was honest with herself, she wanted him to know the truth. "My first husband, Thomas, was a childhood friend. We married when I was 17. He died of pneumonia after a harsh winter." The memory of Thomas's rattling breath still haunted her. "My second husband, Edward, was the local banker in our town. He was killed during a robbery attempt 9 months after our wedding." Owen's hand tightened slightly on hers. "And the third?" Michael was a traveling salesman. He courted me for months. 6 weeks after we married, his horse was spooked by a snake. He was thrown and broke his neck. She swallowed hard. After that, people started saying I was cursed. Bad luck. No one would rent to me, hire me, or even sell me goods. I had to leave. The music ended, but Owen didn't release her immediately. "Thank you for telling me," he said, his blue eyes serious. "None of those tragedies were your fault." "Perhaps not directly," she admitted, "but the pattern is hard to ignore." Owen guided her toward a quieter area near the creek. The setting sun painted the landscape in hues of gold and crimson. "Do you know what I see when I look at you, Florence?" he asked, stopping to face her. "I see a survivor, someone who has endured more sorrow than most people twice her age, yet still has the courage to start again." His words touched something deep within her, a tender place she'd protected for so long. Some would call it foolishness rather than courage. Those would be the same people who blame a widow for her misfortune instead of offering comfort, he replied, a hint of anger in his voice. "I've never had much patience for such people." Florence studied his face in the fading light. There was a steadiness to Owen Hayes that called to her, a solid certainty that both attracted and frightened her. "Why are you being so kind to me?" she asked. He considered her question seriously. "At first, it was because I saw someone being treated unfairly. Now," he paused, choosing his words carefully. "Now it's because I admire your strength and enjoy your company." Before Florence could respond, they were interrupted by one of the ranch hands calling Owen's name. "Looks like I'm needed," he said apologetically. "Will you be all right for a few minutes?" Florence nodded, grateful for the chance to collect her thoughts. As Owen walked away, she turned to look out over the creek, its surface catching the last rays of sunlight. A voice behind her made her start. "So you're the widow who brings death to men." Florence turned to see an older woman with sharp features and expensive clothing. She recognized her as Mrs. Hargrove, the wife of a prominent mine owner. "I don't believe we've been properly introduced," Florence said, keeping her voice steady. "No need for introductions. Your reputation precedes you." Mrs. Hargrove's tone was cold. "Owen Hayes is well respected in this county. He's also unmarried and one of the most eligible bachelors around. I'd hate to see him become your fourth victim." Florence felt as if she'd been slapped. "I assure you, Mrs. Hargrove, I have no designs on Mr. Hayes or any other man." "See that it stays that way," the woman said. "Copper Creek has no place for harbingers of misfortune." With that, she turned and walked back toward the gathering. Florence remained by the creek, her earlier happiness evaporating. Mrs. Hargrove's words had voiced her own deepest fears. What if she was cursed? What if caring for someone again only brought them to harm? When Owen returned, he immediately noticed her change in demeanor. "What happened?" "Nothing," Florence said quickly. "I'm just tired. Would it be possible for me to return to town now?" Owen frowned. "Of course, if that's what you want, but I hope you'll tell me what's troubling you." "Really, it's nothing. I've had a lovely time." She forced a smile. "Thank you for inviting me." Though clearly unconvinced, Owen arranged for Charlie to drive her back to town. As they said goodbye, he took her hand. "I'd like to call on you properly, Florence. May I visit you at your shop next week?" Every instinct warned her to refuse, to protect him from whatever ill fate seemed to follow her. But looking into his earnest face, Florence couldn't bring herself to push him away completely. "Yes," she said quietly. "But Owen, please be careful what you wish for." His response was a smile that warmed her despite her fears. "I always know exactly what I'm wishing for." Florence Everhart. The Silver Moonlight Millinery Shop opened its doors on a Tuesday morning in early August. Florence had worked tirelessly to prepare, and the results were impressive. Hats of various styles adorned the walls and display stands, practical bonnets for everyday wear, elegant creations for church and social occasions, and even a few daring designs influenced by the latest Eastern fashions. Daisy had proven to be not only a skilled assistant, but also a valuable bridge to the community. Her cheerful nature and local connections brought in customers who might otherwise have avoided the unlucky widow's establishment. Florence was adjusting a peacock feather on a particularly dramatic hat when the bell above the door chimed. She looked up to see three well-dressed women enter, led by none other than Mrs. Hargrove. Good morning, ladies. Florence greeted them professionally, though her heart raced. Welcome to Silver Moonlight Millinery. Mrs. Hargrove surveyed the shop with a critical eye. We heard you'd opened. Mrs. Peterson mentioned you carry hat pins from New York. Yes, I do. Would you like to see them? For the next half hour, Florence showed them her wares, answering questions and offering suggestions. To her surprise, all three women purchased items Mrs. Hargrove selecting an understated but expensive hat adorned with silk roses. As they prepared to leave, Mrs. Hargrove lingered. Your work is skillful, Miss Everhart, I'll give you that. Thank you, Florence replied cautiously. Just remember what I said at the ranch. With that pointed reminder, she departed. Daisy emerged from the back room where she'd been organizing supplies. That was Mrs. Hargrove. And she bought something. Yes, though I'm not sure if it was a peace offering or a warning, Florence mused. The bell chimed again, and Owen stepped inside, removing his hat. He wore a clean work shirt and denim trousers, with his gun belt slung low on his hips, a necessary accessory in the territory, particularly for a man who often carried large sums after cattle sales. Ladies, he greeted them, his eyes lingering on Florence. Your shop looks mighty fine. Thank you, Florence said, suddenly aware of how she must look, her hair slightly mussed from working, a measuring tape draped around her neck. What brings you to town today? Banking business, but I wanted to see your shop. He glanced around approvingly. And to invite you to dinner tomorrow night. The hotel restaurant serves a decent steak. Daisy busied herself with straightening ribbons, though Florence could see her hiding a smile. That's very kind, but if you say it's not wise, I might have to argue the point, Owen interrupted gently. It's just dinner, Florence. They both knew it wasn't just anything. In a town like Copper Creek, dining together publicly would be seen as a statement. Very well, she agreed, both thrilled and terrified by her own answer. What time? I'll call for you at 6. His smile was bright enough to light the room. Until tomorrow, then. After he left, Daisy couldn't contain herself any longer. Mr. Hayes is sweet on you. Half the unmarried women in the county have set their caps for him, and he's asking you to dinner. It's not like that, Florence protested, though her racing heart suggested otherwise. It's exactly like that, Daisy insisted, and I think it's wonderful. The remainder of the day brought a steady stream of customers, many clearly there out of curiosity rather than a genuine need for millinery. Florence served them all with professional courtesy, grateful that at least her business skills weren't being questioned, whatever they might think of her personal history. That evening, as Florence sat at her small desk going over the day's receipts, there was a knock at her shop door. It was after hours, and she approached cautiously, peering through the window. Sheriff Robert Taylor stood outside, his expression somber. Florence unlocked the door with trepidation. Miss Everhart, he said, touching the brim of his hat. May I have a word? She invited him in, her mind racing. Had something happened to Owen? Was she being asked to leave town? What can I do for you, Sheriff? He studied her for a moment. I'll be direct, Miss Everhart. Your presence in town has caused some talk. I'm aware of that. Some folks are concerned about your history. He shifted uncomfortably. Particularly given your apparent friendship with Owen Hayes, Florence stiffened. Is there a law against opening a business or having friends, Sheriff? No, madam, but there is a responsibility to maintain peace in the community. He sighed. Look, I've known Owen since he came to these parts after the war. He's a good man who's worked hard for everything he has. I'd hate to see him distracted. By me, you mean? Florence's voice was calm despite her anger. Let me be clear, Sheriff. I have no intention of bringing harm to anyone in Copper Creek, least of all Owen Hayes, but I will not be driven away by superstition and gossip. The sheriff studied her with new respect. Fair enough. I'm not here to run you out of town, Miss Everhart, just to take the measure of your character. And what have you determined? That you've got grit, he said with a slight smile. Good evening, Miss Everhart. Lock up behind me. After he left, Florence leaned against the door, troubled by the encounter. The sheriff's visit confirmed what she already knew: her relationship with Owen, whatever it might become, would face significant opposition. The following evening, Florence dressed with particular care in a dress of deep blue that complemented her auburn hair. She was just pinning a simple cameo at her throat when Mrs. Wilson knocked on her door. "Mr. Hayes is waiting downstairs," the landlady informed her. "You look very nice, dear." The unexpected kindness brought a lump to Florence's throat. "Thank you, Mrs. Wilson." Owen stood when she entered the parlor, his appreciation evident in his gaze. "You're beautiful," he said simply. The walk to the hotel was pleasant, with the heat of the day giving way to a comfortable evening. Owen offered his arm and Florence took it, acutely aware of the glances they received. "People are staring," she murmured. "Let them," he replied. "They'll find something else to talk about soon enough." The hotel restaurant was the finest establishment in Copper Creek, with tablecloths and actual wine glasses. The maitre d' showed them to a table by the window, and Owen ordered a bottle of red wine. "To new beginnings," he toasted after their glasses were filled. Florence sipped the wine, enjoying its rich flavor. "You seem very certain about things, Owen." "About some things, yes." His blue eyes held hers. "I know what I want out of life. A prosperous ranch, a family, a legacy to leave behind. And I know what kind of person I want to share that with." Florence set down her glass. "Someone cursed with bad luck. Someone resilient enough to start over after tragedy. Someone with skill and determination." His voice softened. "Someone with copper hair and eyes the color of whiskey." Florence felt heat rise to her cheeks. "You hardly know me." "I know enough to want to know more," he countered. "I've been watching you these past weeks, Florence. The way you've established your business despite the obstacles. The kindness you show to Daisy. The dignity with which you face people's suspicion." Their steaks arrived, temporarily halting the conversation. As they ate, Owen told her about his plans for the ranch, expanding his herd, improving the bloodlines, possibly adding sheep on the higher pastures. "What about you?" he asked. "What are your dreams beyond the millinery shop?" The question caught her off guard. For so long, her only goal had been survival. "I suppose I'd like to make the shop successful enough to hire more girls like Daisy, perhaps open a second location in Tucson eventually. And personally," Florence hesitated, "I stopped dreaming of personal happiness a long time ago, Owen." He reached across the table, taking her hand. "Maybe it's time to start again." The intensity of his gaze made her heart flutter. This man, who could have any woman in the county, seemed genuinely drawn to her despite, or perhaps because of her complicated past. Their conversation flowed easily through dessert and coffee. As they prepared to leave, Florence noticed several of the town's prominent citizens watching them with undisguised interest. Outside, the night had turned cool, and Owen placed his jacket around her shoulders. They walked slowly, neither eager for the evening to end. "I enjoyed tonight," Florence said as they approached the boarding house. "Thank you." "I'd like to take you riding tomorrow," Owen said. "Show you more of the countryside, if you're free, that is." Florence knew she should refuse. Every moment spent with Owen deepened a connection that frightened her, but the thought of not seeing him seemed worse. "I close the shop at 4 on Saturdays," she said. His smile was worth the risk. "I'll bring a horse for you at 4:30. They paused at the boarding house steps. In the dim light from the windows, Owen's face was partly in shadow, but his eyes reflected the stars above. "Florence," he said softly, "may I call on you regularly? Court you properly?" She shook her head, a lump forming in her throat. "You shouldn't. The things people say, I don't care what they say." His voice was firm. "I care about what's true, and what's true is that I've never met anyone like you." "That's precisely what worries me," she whispered. "What if they're right? What if I am bad luck?" Owen stepped closer. "Then you're my kind of bad luck." He cupped her cheek gently. "I make my own fortune, Florence Everhart, and I think you might be the best fortune I've ever found." Before she could respond, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss so tender it brought tears to her eyes. It was brief but held a promise that shook her to her core. "Good night," he said, his voice husky. "I'll see you tomorrow." Florence watched him walk away, her fingers touching her lips where his had been. For the first time in years, hope blossomed in her heart, a dangerous, wonderful feeling she'd thought long dead. As autumn painted the landscape in golds and reds, Owen courted Florence with steady determination. They rode together on weekends, exploring the hills and valleys around Copper Creek. He brought her wildflowers and books from his personal library. Most evenings, He escorted her home from her shop, sometimes staying for dinner at the boarding house where Mrs. Wilson had gradually warmed to him. Florence's business thrived despite, or perhaps partly, because of her association with Owen. Curiosity brought customers through her door, and her skill kept them coming back. She hired a second assistant, a young widow named Martha, to help with the increasing workload. Not everyone approved of their relationship. Florence occasionally overheard whispers when she entered a room. Mrs. Hargrove made pointed comments about appropriate matches whenever she visited the shop. And one morning, Florence arrived to find which painted across her store window. Owen was furious when he saw it. "I'll find who did this," he promised, helping her clean off the paint. "It doesn't matter," Florence said, though the vandalism had shaken her. "People fear what they don't understand. They fear what they're told to fear," Owen corrected. Mrs. Hargrove and her circle have been spreading tales. That evening, as they sat on the boarding house porch watching the sunset, Florence voiced the concern that had been growing in her mind. "Perhaps we should be more discreet," she suggested. "For your sake." Owen's expression darkened. "I'm not ashamed of courting you, Florence. It's not about shame, it's about your standing in the community, your business relationships." He took her hand, his grip firm. "Do you care for me, Florence?" The directness of his question startled her. They had been courting for nearly 2 months, but neither had spoken explicitly of their feelings. "Yes," she admitted. "More than I should, then that's all that matters." His blue eyes held hers intently. "I love you, Florence Everhart. I've known it since that first dance at my ranch." The words she'd both longed for and dreaded hung in the air between them. "Owen, you shouldn't love you," he interrupted. "Too late, I already do." Tears welled in her eyes. "You don't understand. I care for you too much to watch you become another victim of whatever curse follows me." Owen pulled her gently into his arms. "There is no curse, Florence, just terrible luck and people eager to assign blame." He tilted her chin up. "I'm not asking you to marry me, not yet. I'm just asking you to trust that what we have is stronger than superstition." Florence wanted desperately to believe him. When he kissed her, she allowed herself to surrender to the feeling, to imagine a future where happiness might be possible again. The following day, a telegram arrived from Owen's cattle broker in Kansas City. A deal had been arranged for a significant sale, but Owen needed to travel east to finalize the terms. He would be gone for at least 3 weeks. "I don't want to leave you," he told Florence as they walked along the creek near town, "especially with the tensions in town." "I'll be fine," she assured him, though the prospect of his absence left her feeling hollow. "Your business is important." "You're important," he countered. "More important than any cattle deal." Florence smiled at his vehemence. "Go to Kansas City, make your deal, I'll be here when you return." The night before his departure, Owen invited Florence to dinner at his ranch. Charlie picked her up in the buggy, and when they arrived, Florence was surprised to find the house quiet, with no ranch hands in sight. "I gave them the evening off," Owen explained when she asked. "I wanted our last night before my trip to be private." He had prepared dinner himself, a simple but delicious meal of roast beef, potatoes, and fresh bread. They ate by candlelight, talking of small things, both avoiding mention of his imminent departure. After dinner, Owen led her to the parlor where a fire crackled in the hearth despite the mild evening. On a small table lay a wooden box of polished cherry. "I have something for you," he said, picking up the box. "A gift and a promise." Florence opened it with trembling fingers. Inside, nestled on velvet, was a silver pendant in the shape of a star, inlaid with a small diamond at its center. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "It was my mother's," Owen said, taking the necklace and moving behind her to fasten it around her neck. "My father gave it to her when they settled in Texas before the war. He told her it was to guide her home if she ever felt lost." The pendant rested just below Florence's collarbone, catching the firelight. "I can't accept this. It's a family heirloom." Owen turned her to face him. "That's exactly why I want you to have it, because I intend to make you part of my family, Florence." Her heart pounded. "Owen, when I return from Kansas City," he continued, "I'm going to ask you properly to be my wife. I'm telling you now so you have time to get used to the idea." His smile was tender. "And so you know that no amount of distance will change how I feel about you." Florence touched the star pendant, emotions warring within her. You know what people will say, that you're tempting fate, that I'll bring you misfortune. Let them talk. Owen drew her into his arms. I'd rather have one day calling you my wife than a lifetime of wondering what might have been. Their kiss deepened, conveying all the longing and love they felt. When they finally parted, both were breathless. I should take you back to town, Owen said reluctantly. Though God knows I don't want to. Florence nodded, though part of her wished to stay, to damn propriety and spend the night in his arms, but she knew that would only give the gossips more ammunition. As they rode back to town, Florence leaned against Owen's shoulder, memorizing the feel of him, the scent of his soap and leather and the outdoors. 3 weeks suddenly seemed an eternity. At the boarding house, their goodbye was tender but brief. Wear the star, Owen told her. Remember that I'm coming back to you. I'll count the days, she promised. After he left, Florence stood on the porch long after his figure had disappeared into the darkness, the silver star cool against her skin. The first week of Owen's absence passed uneventfully. Florence threw herself into her work, creating new designs and filling orders. The second week brought a letter from Owen, delivered by the stagecoach. My dearest Florence, it began. Kansas City is all bustle and noise, and I find myself longing for the quiet of the ranch and your company. The cattle deal is proceeding well, though these Eastern businessmen seem determined to stretch every negotiation to its limit. I think of you constantly. At night, I imagine you wearing my mother's star, and it brings me comfort knowing a piece of my heart stays with you. Florence read the letter multiple times, treasuring each word. She wore the star pendant daily, touching it whenever thoughts of Owen filled her mind. On the 15th day after Owen's departure, disaster struck. Florence was working late in her shop when she smelled smoke. Looking up, she saw flames licking at the roof of the building next door, the apothecary. She ran outside, joining the growing crowd as the town's volunteer fire brigade attempted to contain the blaze. The sheriff organized a bucket line from the town well, but the dry wood of the buildings caught quickly. Soon, the flames spread to the millinery shop. Florence watched in horror as everything she had built burned before her eyes. By morning, half the block was destroyed, including her shop and the rooms above where she had lived before moving to the boarding house. As she stood amid the smoking ruins, Sheriff Taylor approached. Miss Everhart, I need to ask you some questions. Of course, she replied, still dazed by the destruction. Where were you when the fire started? In my shop, working on orders. Did you have any lamps lit? A stove burning? Florence frowned. One lamp on my work table. The stove wasn't lit, it wasn't cold enough to need it. The sheriff nodded, making notes. Several witnesses reported seeing you leave the apothecary shortly before the fire began. What? Florence stared at him in shock. I wasn't in the apothecary at all yesterday. Mrs. Hargrove and Mrs. Peterson both claim they saw you exiting the back door approximately 20 minutes before the alarm was raised. Florence felt sick. They're mistaken, or lying. The sheriff's expression hardened. That's a serious accusation, Miss Everhart. As is suggesting I started the fire, she retorted. Mr. Lewis, the apothecary owner, is my friend. Why would I harm his business or my own? I can't say. But with your history, my history has nothing to do with this fire, Florence interrupted, anger replacing shock. I did not start it, intentionally or otherwise. Sheriff Taylor sighed. Nevertheless, I need to investigate all possibilities. In the meantime, I suggest you remain available for further questioning. As he walked away, Florence became aware of the stares from townspeople gathered around the burned buildings. Their expressions ranged from suspicion to outright hostility. Daisy pushed through the crowd to reach her. Miss Florence, are you all right? I came as soon as I heard about the fire. I'm unharmed, Florence assured her, though emotionally she felt battered. But the shop is gone, everything is gone. You can rebuild, Daisy said firmly, and Martha and I will help. Florence touched the star pendant at her throat, drawing strength from it. Thank you, Daisy. But I'm afraid there may be bigger problems than rebuilding. The sheriff seems to think I might have started the fire. Daisy's eyes widened. That's ridiculous. Everyone knows Mr. Lewis keeps all sorts of flammable things in his shop. It was probably an accident. Mrs. Hargrove claims she saw me leaving the apothecary before the fire. Understanding dawned on Daisy's face. She's never wanted you here. She thinks Mr. Hayes should marry her niece from Tucson. Florence had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed didn't make it easier to bear. Without proof of what really happened, it's my word against hers, and we know whose word carries more weight in Copper Creek. That afternoon, Mr. Peterson informed Florence that he would not be rebuilding her shop space. Too much risk, he said, not meeting her eyes. Insurance won't cover it if there's suspicion of arson. By evening, word had spread throughout town that Florence was suspected of starting the fire. Mrs. Wilson, who had gradually warmed to her over the months, now regarded her with renewed suspicion. "I don't know what to believe," the landlady said when Florence returned to the boarding house. "But I run a respectable establishment. I can't have someone under investigation staying here." Florence stared at her in disbelief. "You're evicting me. Where am I supposed to go?" Mrs. Wilson at least had the grace to look uncomfortable. "You can stay until the end of the week. Perhaps by then, things will be clearer." That night, Florence wrote to Owen, pouring out her heart about the fire and the accusations. She didn't know if the letter would reach him before his return, but she needed him to know the truth from her. The next morning brought more trouble. Mr. Lewis, who had been pulled unconscious from the apothecary during the fire, died from his injuries. What had been suspicion of arson now escalated to potential charges of manslaughter or worse. Sheriff Taylor came to the boarding house with 2 deputies. "Florence Everhart, I'm placing you under arrest pending investigation into the death of Harold Lewis and the destruction of property on Main Street." "This is absurd," Florence protested as he handcuffed her. "I had nothing to do with the fire." "That's for a judge to decide," the sheriff replied grimly. "We found kerosene-soaked rags in the alley behind your shop, and Mrs. Hargrove has signed an affidavit stating she saw you leaving the apothecary just before the fire started." As they led her through town to the small jail, Florence felt the weight of accusatory stares. Someone in the crowd shouted, "Witch!" and another voice called out, "Hang her." The jail was a simple building with 3 cells. Florence was placed in the one farthest from the door, the iron bars closing with a finality that chilled her. "You're making a terrible mistake," she told the sheriff. "I'm innocent." "For your sake, I hope that's true," he replied. "But the evidence doesn't look good. And with Owen Hayes away, you've lost your strongest advocate." Florence clutched the star pendant. "When will I see a judge?" "Circuit judge comes through in 2 weeks. Until then, you'll stay here for your own protection as much as anything. Folks are riled up about Lewis dying." After he left, Florence sat on the narrow cot, trying to make sense of what was happening. She was being framed that much was clear. But why? Was it simply because of the superstitions surrounding her, or was there something more deliberate at work? The days that followed were a blur of fear and isolation. Daisy was the only visitor allowed, bringing food to supplement the meager jail provisions and news from town. "People are divided," she reported. "Some are calling for a speedy trial, while others think the whole thing is suspicious. Martha and I have been telling everyone you were with us all afternoon before the fire, but Mrs. Hargrove has a lot of influence." "What about Owen?" Florence asked. "Has there been any word?" Daisy shook her head. "Nothing yet, but his foreman sent a telegram to Kansas City. He should know what's happened by now." A week into her imprisonment, Sheriff Taylor entered the cell block with a grave expression. "Miss Everhart, there's been a development. One of Mrs. Hargrove's servants has come forward with information." Florence stood, hope flaring. "What information?" "She claims Mrs. Hargrove was at home at the time she supposedly saw you at the apothecary. She couldn't have witnessed anything on Main Street." Relief washed over Florence. "Then you'll release me." "Not yet." The sheriff unlocked her cell. "But I'm moving you to my office while we sort this out. It's more comfortable and I can protect you better there." In the sheriff's office, Florence was given a chair by the window and a cup of coffee. "Why would Mrs. Hargrove lie?" she asked. Sheriff Taylor sat across from her. "That's what I intend to find out. There's more to this than a personal dislike of you." Before he could elaborate, the door burst open. Owen stood there, dusty from the trail, his face a mask of controlled fury. "Florence," he breathed, crossing the room in 3 strides to take her in his arms. "Thank God you're all right." She clung to him, tears finally breaking free after days of stoic endurance. "How did you get here so quickly?" Rode day and night after I got the telegram." He turned to the sheriff, not releasing her. "What evidence do you have that she started that fire?" Sheriff Taylor held up a hand. "Calm down, Owen. The situation has changed. Mrs. Hargrove's maid has contradicted her statement, and we've found other inconsistencies." "Inconsistencies?" Owen's voice was dangerous. "You locked up an innocent woman on the word of someone who clearly bears her ill will." "I did my job based on the evidence at hand," the sheriff defended. "And now I'm continuing to do my job by investigating all angles." Owen turned back to Florence, his eyes softening as he touched the star pendant at her throat. "I'm taking you home. Now." "She's still technically in custody," the sheriff objected. "Then consider her in my custody," Owen said firmly. "I'll sign whatever you need." "But she's not spending another night in that cell." After some argument, the sheriff agreed to release Florence into Owen's care, with the understanding that she would remain at the Silver Spur Ranch until the investigation was complete. As they rode toward the ranch, Florence nestled against Owen's chest, exhausted but relieved. "I thought you might believe I was involved," she admitted. "The evidence seemed so damning." Owen's arms tightened around her. "I know you, Florence. You're not capable of such an act." He kissed the top of her head. "Besides, I had my foreman investigating while I was traveling back. He's discovered some interesting connections between Mrs. Hargrove and the Kansas City cattle buyers I was negotiating with." Florence pulled back to look at him. "What connections?" "Her late husband was a founding investor in their company, and it seems they've been trying to acquire the Silver Spur for some time." His expression was grim. "I think the fire and your arrest were meant to distract me, to force me to accept their lowball offer out of desperation to return quickly." "That's diabolical," Florence said, shocked by the calculation involved. "But why target me specifically?" "Because you're what I care about most," Owen said simply. "They knew that through their business connections, and your reputation made you an easy scapegoat." At the ranch, Owen's housekeeper had prepared a room for Florence and a hot meal for them both. After dinner, they sat before the fire in the parlor, Owen's arm protectively around her shoulders. "What happens now?" Florence asked. "Now we clear your name completely," Owen replied. "The sheriff is questioning Mrs. Hargrove tonight. With the maid's testimony and the evidence my foreman gathered about the business connection, I believe she'll confess to orchestrating the false accusations. And the fire itself, likely paid someone to start it, we'll find out who." He stroked her hair gently. "The important thing is that you're safe. Everything else can be rebuilt." Florence touched the star pendant. "I was so afraid, Owen, not just of being convicted, but that you might doubt me." "Never," he said fiercely. "From the moment I met you, I knew what kind of woman you are. Brave, honest, resilient." He turned to face her fully. "Florence, I know this isn't how I planned it, but I can't wait any longer. Will you marry me? Be my wife, my partner, the mother of my children?" Despite everything she'd endured, or perhaps because of it, Florence felt certainty settle in her heart. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." Owen's kiss was tender at first, then deepened with all the emotion of the past weeks, the longing of separation, the fear of loss, the joy of reunion. When they finally parted, both were breathless. "I was supposed to be your bad luck," Florence said with a tremulous smile. "Instead, you nearly lost everything because of me." "No," Owen corrected her. "I nearly lost everything because of greed and prejudice. You are and have always been my good fortune." He touched the star at her throat. "My guiding star." 3 days later, Sheriff Taylor arrived at the Silver Spur with news. Mrs. Hargrove had confessed to orchestrating the false accusations against Florence. More significantly, her nephew had admitted to starting the fire at her behest, never intending for anyone to be harmed. "They'll both face charges," the sheriff said. "Along with their accomplices, you're formally cleared of all suspicion, Miss Everhart." "Thank you, Sheriff," Florence said, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. "I owe you an apology," he added gruffly. "I should have questioned the evidence more thoroughly from the beginning." Owen clasped his shoulder. "You followed procedure, Robert, and in the end you found the truth. That's what matters." After the sheriff left, Owen pulled Florence into his arms. "It's over. You can go back to town with your head held high." Florence nestled against him. I'm not sure I want to go back, not to stay anyway. No, he asked, surprised. My shop is gone, and while I could rebuild it, I'm thinking perhaps I'd rather build something else. She looked up at him. A life here with you. Perhaps a shop on the ranch for special orders, but mainly, just us. Owen's smile was radiant. Nothing would make me happier. They were married 2 weeks later in a small ceremony at the ranch. Daisy served as Florence's maid of honor, while Charlie stood as Owen's best man. To Florence's surprise, several townspeople attended, including Mrs. Wilson and the sheriff. Most folks feel terrible about what happened, Daisy explained. Especially now that the truth about Mrs. Hargrove is known. Florence wore a simple white dress she had designed herself and carried wildflowers gathered from the hills around the ranch. Around her neck, the silver star caught the autumn sunlight as she spoke her vows to the man who had believed in her when no one else would. I take you, Owen Hayes, to be my husband, she said, her voice clear and strong. I promise to stand by you through fortune and misfortune, through all the days of our lives. Owen's hands were steady as he placed the gold band on her finger. I take you, Florence Everhart, to be my wife. You are the fortune I found when others saw only risk. I will cherish you always. The reception lasted well into the evening, with ranch hands and townspeople alike celebrating the union. As darkness fell, lanterns illuminated the courtyard where the couple shared their first dance as husband and wife. Happy, Owen murmured against her ear as they swayed to the fiddle's melody. More than I ever thought possible, Florence replied, her heart full. For so long I believed I was cursed to bring death to those I loved. And now, she smiled up at him. Now I believe I was meant to find you, that every loss led me here to this moment. Owen kissed her forehead. To think I almost didn't approach you that first day in town. What made you decide to help with my trunk? The way you held your head high despite the whispers. You looked like a woman who refused to be defeated. His blue eyes shone with love. I admired your courage before I even knew your name. As the celebration continued around them, Florence and Owen slipped away to the house that was now their shared home. In the privacy of their bedroom, lit only by firelight, they came together as husband and wife, their passion tempered by tenderness, their bodies expressing what words could not fully convey. Afterward, as Florence lay in Owen's arms, she touched the silver star that still hung around her neck. Your mother's star really did guide me home, she whispered. Owen kissed her softly. And it will guide our children someday and their children after them. Children, Florence repeated, savoring the word. A family. Our family, Owen affirmed, our legacy. As moonlight streamed through the window, casting silver patterns across their bed, Florence closed her eyes in contentment. The woman once whispered about as harbinger of death now held life and love in her arms, proving that even the darkest reputation could not stand against the light of truth, and the strength of a heart brave enough to claim its fortune. 1 year later, Florence stood on the porch of the Silver Spur Ranch house, watching riders approach in the golden light of sunset. Her hand rested on her swollen belly, feeling the movement of the child within a daughter. She was certain, though Owen insisted it would be a son. Copper Creek had changed significantly in the past year. After the revelations about Mrs. Hargrove's schemes, many in town had reassessed their beliefs about Florence. The circuit judge had sentenced Mrs. Hargrove to 5 years in the territorial prison, while her nephew received 3 years for arson. Florence had indeed opened a small millinery workshop at the ranch, taking special orders from clients who now came from as far as Tucson to commission her designs. Daisy had become her full partner, managing most of the business as Florence's pregnancy progressed. Owen dismounted from his horse and handed the reins to a ranch hand. His face lit up when he saw her, as it did every time they were reunited, even after a few hours' separation. "How are my girls?" he asked, climbing the steps to kiss her. "We're fine," Florence replied, guiding his hand to feel the baby's kick. "Though your daughter is practicing her riding skills early," Owen laughed. "That's my boy, you mean." Their good-natured disagreement about the baby's gender had become a running joke between them. In truth, neither cared whether they had a son or daughter, only that the child was healthy. The ranch had prospered under their joint stewardship. Owen's cattle business had expanded, while Florence's eye for beauty had transformed the house into a true home. Together, they had created something neither could have built alone. As they stood watching the sunset, arms around each other, Florence reflected on the journey that had brought them together. From whispers of bad luck to the fortune they had found in each other, their story had become something of a legend in Copper Creek, a testament to love's power to overcome prejudice and fear. "What are you thinking about?" Owen asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "How things change," she replied. "A year ago I was the cursed widow. Now I'm just Florence Hayes, rancher's wife and mother-to-be." "Not just anything," Owen corrected, kissing her temple. "You're still the bravest woman I know, the heart of this ranch, my guiding star." As if in agreement, the baby kicked again, making them both laugh. In that moment, surrounded by the life they had built together, Florence knew with absolute certainty that she had finally found her true fortune, not in spite of the past that had shaped her, but because of it. The whispers had long since faded, replaced by a truth far more powerful. That love, when claimed boldly, could transform even the darkest fortune into immeasurable blessing.